You're crouched in a dimly lit space, the walls pressing in with a quiet weight, and outside the world feels dangerous in a way that doesn't need sirens to prove it. You can almost hear the distant hum of tension, a reminder that for decades people lived with the possibility of sudden destruction hanging over them. Now ask yourself, if everyone tells you to hide underground, what do you do when hiding isn't enough? The Cold War created a generation obsessed with concrete and steel, but buried in archives and fading memory was a simpler, quieter solution, one that endured longer than the most fortified bunkers and didn't rely on massive construction. This is the mystery you're stepping into, because unlike the iconic shelters, this hack didn't make headlines. It relied on understanding, foresight, and subtle design choices that kept spaces functional and strong for decades, even when the world around them was anything but. Imagine discovering that survival wasn't about resistance alone, but about cooperation with the environment, clever use of materials, and human behavior tuned to endure extremes. What you're about to explore is less about fear and more about quiet resilience. A forgotten strategy that held firm while the loud solutions crumbled or became obsolete. You have to feel the reality of that time to understand why it mattered. Families rehearsed drills, stockpiled supplies, and memorized escape routes, but real danger wasn't always visible. Radiation, structural collapse, or contamination didn't announce themselves, and most people discovered the limits of traditional bunkers when isolation and stagnation set in. Engineers and planners began looking beyond brute force, realizing that walls alone could not ensure survival. Imagine being taught that your own home could be a shield, not because of reinforced concrete, but because of thoughtful design and strategic adaptation. Air circulation, thermal balance, moisture control, these became more valuable than depth or thickness. People learned that enclosed spaces could fail faster than adaptable ones, and that survival often depended on subtle cues rather than dramatic gestures. Over time, these lessons were quietly recorded, sometimes tested in smaller shelters, but rarely publicized. The stakes were high. One misstep could mean suffocation, illness, or panic. And yet those who understood the system found that endurance was not just about what they built, but how they interacted with it. It was a living architecture, one that required attention and understanding rather than passive protection. Here's where it changes. Imagine a space designed to survive, not by resisting the outside world completely, but by channeling it intelligently. The Cold War shelter hack relied on controlling airflow, stabilizing temperature, and minimizing stress on structures, all without complex machinery. The walls were built with layered materials that absorbed pressure, insulated against extremes, and allowed for subtle ventilation. Each vent, each chamber, each partition had a purpose. Fresh air entered gradually, contaminants were diluted naturally, and heat moved where it was needed without mechanical help. Here's the clever part. The system required no electronics, no filters, no high-tech intervention. Survival came from understanding physics and human behavior. Occupants could adjust openings, redirect flows, and regulate warmth simply by observation and small actions. It was intuitive, almost invisible, yet far more effective in long-term scenarios than massive sealed bunkers. The method emphasized balance over brute force, teaching people to work with the environment rather than fight it. And because it relied on basic principles, it continued to function decades after its construction, silently outperforming more expensive, more elaborate shelters that required maintenance, attention, or luck. It worked because it embraced adaptation. Traditional bunkers aimed to isolate and control, but this system acknowledged that environments change and humans are part of that equation. By allowing controlled movement of air, gradual heat transfer and structural flexibility, the shelters maintained livable conditions under conditions that would overwhelm standard designs. Moisture didn't accumulate dangerously, pressure shifts were absorbed, and the people inside stayed mentally and physically safer. The genius was subtle. The shelter didn't demand heroic intervention. It worked quietly, relying on natural physics and common materials. Planners realized that endurance wasn't about resisting the world. It was about cooperating with it. And when crises arrived, these spaces performed in ways that even the most fortified bunkers could not. While others faltered under rigidity, these adaptable shelters remained functional, comfortable, and safe. It's the kind of success that goes unnoticed precisely because it appears effortless, and yet it outlasted structures that relied on dramatic construction or rigid design. What made it remarkable wasn't its complexity, but its harmony with the forces humans often ignore, quietly preserving life when brute force alone failed. So why did it vanish from public knowledge? Because fear sells better than understanding. Bunkers were easy to market, impressive in photos, and provided a comforting illusion of total control. The quiet system required explanation, observation, and participation. It asked people to trust their own awareness instead of concrete walls. Manuals were rewritten, designs simplified, and nuance disappeared. The approach survived in fragments, scattered blueprints, anecdotal evidence, and a few long-lasting structures, but it never became mainstream. As technology promised simpler answers, behavior-driven survival became invisible. The logic didn't fail, it was sidelined by narrative. People forgot that the most durable solutions often rely on adaptability rather than rigidity. By erasing subtlety from survival planning, the world lost a tool that could have made emergency living more effective, sustainable, and accessible. Today, the few remaining examples stand as quiet monuments to ingenuity, overlooked because they don't look heroic, but still perform flawlessly decades later, proving that sometimes the best solutions are the ones history hides rather than celebrates. Now, consider why it matters today. You live in an era of uncertainty. Natural disasters, power failures, and social upheaval make resilience more relevant than ever. The forgotten Cold War shelter hack teaches the lesson that outpaces concrete and steel. Understand your environment, use simple principles, and adapt intelligently. You don't need enormous construction to survive. You need awareness, balance, and subtle design. Modern preppers, architects, and emergency planners are quietly rediscovering these ideas because they work, decades after their creators vanished from the manuals. It's a reminder that the smartest survival solutions are often quiet, counterintuitive, and easy to overlook. And for you, that means preparation isn't about panic or spectacle. It's about insight. If you take one thing from this story, let it be that longevity and safety come from harmonizing with the world, not trying to outmuscle it. Study, adapt, and remember the forgotten wisdom. Sometimes the best secrets are the ones left to endure in silence, waiting for someone to notice them again.